Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper, where lost truths, ancient mysteries, and forbidden history collide. Let's question the past and uncover what was never meant to be found. In the story of Eden, a serpent tempts Eve, leading to humanity's fall. For millennia, this creature has been identified as Satan. But the original Hebrew text never mentions the devil. The serpent's true identity is a far older and more complex mystery. In the foundational stories of Western civilization, few narratives are as powerful, as influential, or as widely known as the story of the Garden of Eden from the Book of Genesis. It is a tale that has shaped art, literature, and theology for millennia. A primordial drama of innocence, temptation, and the fall of humanity. At the very heart of this drama is a single pivotal character, the serpent. In the popular imagination, forged by centuries of Christian tradition and cultural reinforcement, the identity of this serpent is a settled matter. It is Satan, the devil, the great cosmic adversary of God, who took on the form of a snake to deceive Eve and bring sin and death into a perfect world. This identification is so deeply ingrained in our cultural consciousness that it is rarely questioned. Yet, a close and careful reading of the original Hebrew text of Genesis reveals a startling and profound omission. The original authors of the Eden story never mention Satan, the devil, or any supernatural demonic entity. The creature that speaks to Eve is not a fallen angel in disguise. It is presented simply as an animal, a cunning beast of the field. To understand the true original identity of the serpent in Eden, one must first strip away thousands of years of later theological interpretation and return to the text itself, where a far stranger and more ambiguous creature resides. The story begins in the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis, immediately following the creation of Adam and Eve and their placement in the idyllic Garden of Eden. The narrative introduces its antagonist with a simple, almost zoological description. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. This opening line is of critical importance. The text explicitly categorizes the serpent, the Naash in the original Hebrew, as one of God's own creations, a beast of the field. It is not a primordial entity of evil that has invaded the garden from some external, hellish realm. It is part of the created order, a member of the animal kingdom, just like the lions, the eagles, and the cattle. Its defining characteristic, according to the text, is not that it is evil, but that it is crafty, or cunning, aram in Hebrew, a word that implies intelligence, subtlety, and a capacity for shrewdness. It is the smartest of the animals, but it is still fundamentally an animal. The fact that this serpent can talk is, of course, a remarkable feature. However, in the context of ancient Near Eastern folklore and mythology, talking animals were a common and accepted literary trope. They appear in fables and myths across the ancient world, often to impart a piece of wisdom, to serve as a foil to a human character, or to act as a mouthpiece for a particular point of view. The original audience of the Genesis story would not necessarily have interpreted a talking animal as a sign of a supernatural demonic possession. They would have recognized it as a familiar storytelling device, a way of personifying a particular quality or force within the narrative. The serpent is the personification of craftiness, of a form of wisdom that stands in opposition to the simple obedience required by God. The conversation that unfolds between the serpent and Eve is a masterclass in subtlety and deception. The serpent does not issue a direct command to disobey God. Instead, it begins with a seemingly innocent question that is designed to plant a seed of doubt. Did God really say, "You shall not eat from any tree in the garden"? This is a clever misrepresentation of God's command. God had not forbidden them from eating from any tree, only from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. By exaggerating the prohibition, the serpent makes God's command seem unreasonable and overly restrictive. When Eve corrects the serpent, stating the true command, the serpent moves to its second, more direct assault. It flatly contradicts God, saying, "You will not die." It then offers an alternative and deeply seductive explanation for God's prohibition. God, the serpent claims, is not trying to protect them. He is trying to suppress them. For God knows, the serpent says, that when you eat of it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The temptation it offers is not for a piece of fruit, but for a form of divine knowledge and autonomy. The serpent's argument is that God's command is not a loving protection, but an act of jealous tyranny, designed to keep humanity in a state of naive and childlike ignorance. This is the heart of the temptation. The serpent is not portrayed as a source of pure, mindless evil, but as a proponent of an alternative path to wisdom, one that is achieved through disobedience and the seizing of forbidden knowledge. It is a powerful and compelling argument, and it succeeds. Even then Adam eat the fruit. The critical point in all of this is that the serpent is presented as acting on its own behalf, as a cunning creature using its natural intelligence to challenge the established order. There is no hint in the text that it is being controlled by some greater, external power of evil. The second crucial piece of evidence for the serpent's original, non-demonic identity is the complete absence of the character of Satan, or the devil, in the early parts of the Hebrew Bible. The theological concepts that we now associate with these terms, the idea of a single cosmic adversary of God, a fallen angel who rules over a kingdom of demons, and is the ultimate source of all evil in the world, simply did not exist in the worldview of the early Israelite authors who composed the book of Genesis. The word Satan does appear in the Hebrew Bible, but not as a proper name. It is a common noun, ha-Satan, which means the accuser, or the adversary. It describes a role or a function, not a specific entity. In the book of Job, for example, ha-Satan appears in the heavenly court as a member of God's own council, a sort of divine prosecuting attorney whose job it is to test the righteousness of human beings. He is not a rebel fighting against God. He is a functionary working for God. The idea of the devil as a great rebellious dragon, the sworn enemy of God and humanity, is a much later theological development. It began to take shape during and after the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC, likely influenced by the dualistic cosmology of Persian Zoroastrianism, which posited a cosmic struggle between a god of light, Ahura Mazda, and a god of darkness, Ahriman. This concept was then further developed in later Jewish and early Christian writings. To retroactively insert this fully formed, later concept of Satan back into the much older story of Genesis is an anachronism. The original authors of the Eden narrative did not have this character in their theological vocabulary. They were telling a different kind of story, one that was not about a cosmic battle between good and evil, but about the boundaries between the divine and the human, and the nature of obedience and wisdom. The final and most compelling piece of textual evidence for the serpent's original identity as a simple animal is the nature of the curse that God pronounces upon it after the fall. When God confronts the serpent, his punishment is not a metaphysical or eternal one. It is a physical, biological, and etiological curse, a punishment that is directed at the entire species of snakes. God says to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you among all animals and among all wild creatures. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life." This is a classic example of an etiological story, a type of origin myth that was common in the ancient world, designed to explain a feature of the natural world as it was known. The curse explains why snakes, unlike other animals, have no legs and crawl on the ground. The detail about eating dust is a poetic expression of this lowliness. It is a punishment that fits the creature's nature as an animal. If the serpent were actually Satan, a powerful non-corporeal angelic being in disguise, a curse that condemns him to a specific reptilian mode of locomotion makes very little theological sense. The punishment is directed at the snake, not at a fallen angel. It is a story about the humbling of the craftiest of the beasts, not a story about the eternal damnation of the prince of darkness. The serpent of Genesis 3 is, therefore, a creature of the earth, a profoundly clever and dangerously persuasive animal, but an animal nonetheless. Its story is a myth about the origin of human suffering and the loss of innocence, not a literal account of the first battle in a cosmic war between God and the devil. To fully grasp the original meaning of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, it is essential to step outside the confines of the biblical text itself, and to place the story within its broader historical and cultural context. The book of Genesis was not written in a vacuum. It was composed in the ancient Near East, a world teeming with a rich and complex tapestry of myths, symbols, and religious ideas. The authors of the Genesis narrative were in a constant dialogue, both conscious and unconscious, with the powerful cultures that surrounded them: the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, and the Canaanites. In this ancient world, the serpent was not a simple creature. It was one of the most potent, widespread, and deeply ambiguous symbols of them all. It was a creature that embodied a profound duality, representing at once the forces of wisdom, healing, and immortality, and at the same time, the forces of chaos, destruction, and a challenge to the established divine order. The serpent of Eden, therefore, was not a randomly chosen animal. It was a carefully selected symbol, a figure loaded with a deep and complex cultural resonance that would have been immediately recognizable to its original audience. Throughout the ancient Near East, the serpent was frequently associated with positive and powerful divine attributes. Its ability to shed its skin was a powerful and obvious symbol of rebirth, renewal, and immortality. The creature's silent, mysterious movements and its connection to the earth also linked it to chthonic deities, gods of the underworld, and to secret, hidden knowledge. In ancient Egypt, this symbolism was particularly prominent. The cobra, or uraeus, was a powerful symbol of divine authority and protection. An rearing cobra, ready to strike, was a common feature on the headdress of the pharaohs, representing their divine power and their ability to vanquish their enemies. The goddess Wadjet, the protector of Lower Egypt, was often depicted as a cobra. The serpent in this context was not a creature of evil, but a powerful guardian of the divine and royal order. In Mesopotamian mythology, the serpent also played a crucial and often ambiguous role. In the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest works of literature, the hero Gilgamesh, on his quest for eternal life, finally obtains a magical plant that can restore youth. However, as he stops to bathe, a serpent smells the plant's fragrance, steals it, and immediately sheds its skin, becoming young again. In this story, the serpent is not purely evil. It is the clever and opportunistic creature that snatches away humanity's chance at immortality, a symbol of the cunning forces of nature that hold the secrets of life and death. This association with wisdom and secret knowledge is a recurring theme. In many cultures, the serpent was a symbol of healing. The modern medical symbol of the rod of Asclepius, a serpent entwined around a staff, has its roots in this ancient tradition. The serpent was seen as a creature that possessed the secret knowledge of the earth, of herbs and remedies that could cure disease. This positive and powerful symbolism was particularly strong in the Canaanite culture, the immediate neighbors of the ancient Israelites. The Canaanites worshipped a variety of gods and goddesses associated with fertility, and the serpent, with its phallic shape and its connection to the earth, was a potent symbol of this life-giving power. Archaeological discoveries at Canaanite sites have unearthed numerous serpent figurines, suggesting that snake-worshipping cults were a significant part of their religious landscape. However, the serpent also possessed a much darker and more menacing symbolic meaning in the ancient Near East. It was frequently cast as the embodiment of the primordial forces of chaos, a monstrous adversary that threatened the established order of the gods and the cosmos. The sea, a place of mystery, danger, and chaotic power, was often personified as a great sea serpent or dragon. In Canaanite mythology, one of the central stories was the battle between the storm god Baal, the champion of order, and the great, seven-headed sea serpent, Latin, a figure closely related to the biblical Leviathan. Baal's victory over Latin was the foundational myth, a story of the triumph of divine order over the untamed forces of chaos. This theme is even more central in the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish. This epic poem describes a great cosmic battle between the young god Marduk, who represents the forces of order, and the primordial goddess Tiamat, who takes the form of a monstrous chaos dragon or sea serpent. Marduk slays Tiamat, splits her body in two, and from her carcass, he creates the heavens and the earth. The very act of creation in this worldview is an act of violent combat, a victory of the gods of order over a powerful serpentine embodiment of primordial chaos. The serpent in the Garden of Eden can be understood as a direct heir to this second, darker tradition. The Garden of Eden is a picture of perfect divine order. It is a harmonious world, a sanctuary where humanity lives in a state of simple, unquestioning obedience to its creator. The serpent is the creature that disrupts this perfect order. It is a chaos creature, a being that introduces doubt, disobedience, and deception into God's pristine creation. Its actions directly lead to the unraveling of the harmonious relationship between God and humanity, and between humanity and the natural world. By tempting Eve to challenge God's command, the serpent is playing the classic role of the mythological adversary, the force that seeks to undermine the established divine order. The story of the fall is, in this sense, a small-scale, garden-variety version of the great cosmic battles of Canaanite and Mesopotamian myth. It is a story of how a chaos creature successfully infiltrated God's perfect creation and brought it crashing down. This understanding of the serpent as a chaos symbol leads to another, more specific and polemical interpretation. Some scholars argue that the story of the serpent in Eden is a deliberate and powerful piece of religious propaganda, a polemic designed as a direct attack on the serpent-worshipping cults of the neighboring Canaanite religions. The early Israelite faith was engaged in a long and often difficult struggle to establish its unique, monotheistic identity in a region that was overwhelmingly polytheistic. A central part of this struggle was the denunciation of the gods and religious practices of their neighbors. The authors of the Genesis narrative would have been well aware that the serpent was a potent and positive symbol in the Canaanite fertility cults, where it represented wisdom, healing, and the life-giving forces of nature. The story of the fall can be read as a brilliant and subversive reframing of this symbol. The biblical author takes this revered pagan symbol of wisdom and deliberately casts it in a negative light. The serpent's wisdom is redefined as a deceptive and dangerous cunning that leads not to life, but to death and suffering. The serpent, the symbol of fertility, becomes the agent that brings a curse of pain in childbirth upon Eve. By portraying the central symbol of their religious rivals as a treacherous creature that is the direct cause of humanity's alienation from God, the biblical author was making a powerful theological statement. They were effectively saying to their audience, the path of the serpent, the path offered by these pagan religions, is not a path to wisdom and life. It is a path to disobedience, chaos, and divine judgment. The story in this view is a form of cultural warfare, an attempt to demonize the symbols of a rival faith and to establish the supremacy of their own. It is a brilliant and enduring piece of religious polemic that has shaped the Western perception of the serpent for thousands of years. The serpent of the original Genesis story was a complex and ambiguous figure, a cunning animal, a symbol of chaos, and a polemical jab at pagan religions. Critically, however, it was not the devil. The fusion of the Eden serpent with the figure of Satan, the great cosmic adversary of God, was not a feature of the original narrative, but a later and highly influential reinterpretation. This metamorphosis was a gradual process, a theological evolution that took place over a period of many centuries, primarily in the rich and turbulent intellectual environment of the Second Temple period of Judaism, roughly 500 BC to 70 AD. It was during this time that Jewish thought, influenced by new cultural and philosophical currents, began to develop a more detailed angelology and demonology. This new framework was then cemented by the writers of the New Testament, who retroactively identified the ancient serpent of the garden with their fully formed concept of Satan. This act of interpretive fusion would become a cornerstone of Christian theology, forever changing the way the serpent was understood and profoundly shaping the entire Western cultural imagination. The seeds of this transformation were planted in the centuries following the Babylonian exile. The experience of the exile and the subsequent exposure to Persian culture had a profound impact on Jewish thought. They encountered the highly dualistic cosmology of Zoroastrianism, which posited a grand, cosmic struggle between a supreme God of good and light and a powerful co-eternal principle of evil and darkness. This dualistic framework, while never fully adopted into mainstream Judaism, influenced the development of a more pronounced sense of a cosmic spiritual battle. Jewish literature from this period, particularly the apocalyptic and pseudepigraphical writings, non-canonical texts written under the name of an ancient authority, began to explore the origins of evil in a more systematic way. Writings like the Book of Enoch, which was widely read and influential in the centuries before and during the time of Jesus, developed a detailed narrative of a rebellion in heaven. This story, an embellishment of a cryptic passage in Genesis 6, tells of a group of angels, the Watchers, who lusted after human women, descended to earth, and taught humanity forbidden knowledge, leading to a world of sin and corruption. These texts created a new category of being: the fallen angel, a once heavenly creature who had, through pride and rebellion, become an enemy of God and a source of evil in the world. As this concept of a primordial angelic rebellion took hold, Jewish thinkers began to look back at their older scriptures and reinterpret them through this new lens. The enigmatic and malevolent serpent in the Garden of Eden was a natural candidate for re-identification. It was no longer seen as a mere animal, but as a physical disguise, a vessel used by one of these great rebellious fallen angels to carry out his evil work. This reinterpretation was then adopted and solidified by the writers of the New Testament, who were heirs to this evolved Jewish worldview. For the early Christians, the world was a battleground between the kingdom of God, inaugurated by Jesus Christ, and the forces of a powerful, personal, and cosmic evil entity they called Satan or the devil. They saw this conflict playing out on both a spiritual and a historical level. When they read the story of Eden, they saw not just an ancient folk tale, but the opening salvo in this great cosmic war. The serpent's temptation of Eve was reframed as the first act of Satan's rebellion against God's plan for humanity. This identification is made most explicit in the final book of the New Testament, the Book of Revelation. In a visionary passage describing the ultimate defeat of evil, the author identifies the great, primordial enemy with a string of titles, leaving no room for ambiguity. He describes a great, seven-headed dragon, the ultimate symbol of cosmic evil, as that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, Revelation 12 verse 9. This single verse became the definitive and authoritative link. It officially and forever fused the identity of the cunning Naash from the garden with the figure of the great cosmic adversary. The Apostle Paul also alludes to this connection in his letters, writing, "I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by its cunning, your thoughts will be led astray." 2 Corinthians 11 verse 3, implicitly linking the original deception with the ongoing spiritual deception he attributed to Satan. This fusion of the serpent and Satan became a foundational and non-negotiable tenet of mainstream Christian theology. It provided a powerful and dramatic narrative for the origin of sin. The fall of humanity was no longer a simple story of human disobedience prompted by a clever animal. It was a cosmic drama, a tale of a once great angel who in his pride, rebelled against God and then in his malice, sought to corrupt God's most beloved creation. This interpretation has had a profound and lasting cultural impact. It transformed the serpent from a symbol of chaos and paganism into the physical embodiment of absolute, metaphysical evil. This is the image that would dominate Western art and literature for the next 2,000 years. In medieval cathedrals, the serpent is often depicted with a human, female face, a Lilith-like figure, to emphasize the seductive nature of the temptation. In John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost, Satan's infiltration of the garden and his possession of the serpent is a central and dramatic episode. This powerful literary and artistic tradition has so completely shaped our cultural imagination that the identification of the serpent with the devil is now almost automatic. The original, more ambiguous creature of the Genesis text has been almost entirely eclipsed by the shadow of its later, more sinister interpretation, a powerful example of how the meaning of a symbol can be completely and permanently transformed by the long and complex process of theological evolution. The Serpent of Eden is a powerful example of how a symbol can evolve. What began as a cunning creature in a folky theology became a symbol of cosmic chaos, and finally the face of the devil himself, a transformation of meaning over thousands of years. Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. Stay curious, question everything, and remember the truth is often buried deeper than we think.